Hey guys, welcome back to another tutorial. Today I'm going to be discussing module scripts and how you can use them in your own game. So let's just jump straight into it. So traditionally in a lot of games, you'll probably see something where we have a lot of scripts with code inside of them, or we'll have one main server script which has thousands of lines of code in it. And something like that can be hard to read and hard to debug. Especially if you get one error in the script, it could cause your one game script to stop working, which will cause errors for your players, and they won't be happy. So let's look at how we can use module scripts. And so a module script is um, essentially a container of data. And it's not like your normal script where it runs automatically. We have to get a module script. So we have to require a module script, which is this keyword here, which essentially loads that data. And a module script is no different than representing data in your own script already, such as saying declaring a function or assigning a variable or even making a table. And this is the most common use for module scripts is creating a table which holds other information, such as it could be more tables or more numbers or information, like we have variables or even functions, just like that. And so instead of representing our data in a normal script or a local script like this, we take it and we put it in the module script to compartmentalize it so we can use it in different parts of our game repeatedly. Hey guys, so this is me in editing. Just wanted to come in and say that I recently made a Discord server, so if you want to talk about videos, discuss new video ideas, or want any help with your scripts, the link will be in the description. Okay, so I've very quickly written out four very valuable versions or forms of a module script. So the first is a class, and a class follows along the traditional object-oriented programming style of creating a new instance of something and then performing actions with this self data, which is um, basically a class's own information. So essentially, like a part in the workspace, a module script can have data like a name or a transparency or a size, all of that, but we represent it with code. This also brings up a key piece of module scripts, which is the difference between here, the dot operator, and the colon operator. And if you look at it, the difference between the two is that if we call class dot foo and we pass in any variables here, the variables we're going to get to use in the function are whatever those variables are. And this three dots here basically means that anything passed in is can be represented as these three dots, no matter how many arguments are passed in. So that's the dot operator. Whatever arguments that are passed in are able to be used in the function. The difference between the dot and the colon operator is that the colon secretly passes in self as the first variable. So foo and bar would be equivalent if we passed in self as this first variable here. And let's say we put this code in here and in here, dot foo and colon bar would perform the same action. But bar does not have self in this arguments list here. So typically what happens is we use this dot method when we're creating a module script that has an action that is not occurring on itself. And we'll get to that later when we talk about utils. But for this example, for the class itself has this method of print. So similar to a part, when we would call a method on a part like destroy, when we call colon destroy on a part, we're telling the part to destroy itself. We're calling this destroy operation on that part. So that's what the colon operator is for. But when we say instance.new part, we're not calling an operation on instance, we're asking instance to create a new part for us. So that's the difference between the dot and the colon. The next form your module scripts can take is data. And data is something that you want to represent in your game, whether it be an item or a character or some sort of information that the player wants to view or the server wants to represent. It just stores information. And so here I have just a simple data form with a name, a role, and a purpose, and we fill out the field. And this data can be anything over here. It could be a string, it could be a number, it could be a function, it could be another table with more information inside of it. The next use case is utilities. I like to think of utilities as actions that you perform on data to give a desired result. So let's say you have, and we'll see an example of this later, but let's say you have a large number like 36 million, right? And we don't want to fill our entire text label on the screen with 36 million. We want it to say 36M. So maybe you'll write a function that shortens it from 36 million and gives you a string 36M. And that would be an example of a utility because you might want to revert that, and so you'll add another utility to go from short to long after you have your long to short function. And so then you'll bundle those all together as a number utility. And so that's kind of the usefulness of module scripts in that area is for utilities. And so this utility that I've written just tells me about a thing. And this thing is purposely describing this data type that I've made here so that we can see it as an example in the future. The last example is what I call functional, which is essentially where one module script will return one function that does some sort of action. And I typically use this in my interface, as we'll see later, that a module script will return one function, and inside that function, it will control all of the components for that part of the interface, whether it be showing your kills, or displaying the shop view, or changing between a gameplay or a lobby view. And so that's my main use for functional. But you could also put a function in here that does something like creating a new frame or a new label and giving it all the properties and creating it such that you don't have to do that in your script, especially if you use that frame or label elsewhere, like an item frame or an item cell, perhaps, in an inventory. Okay, so what I've done here is I've gotten all of these different forms of module scripts in my main server script, which I'll rename to server. And let's look and see how these different type of module scripts can interact. And the first thing that I proposed was talking about how this util function can be used on this data form. So let's say util.tellmeabout data. And we want this to tell us about this data that we've represented. So hopefully, if I've written it right, we should see in the output, Queeker Tom is a scripter and they teach. And we could see represented from our data that Queeker Tom, scripter, and teach. And we could change this data, and we could even add more data. So let's create data second here. And in here, if we go back to our server and we ask to get data second, we can tell us about data second. And we should see in the output, Mechnor is a gamer and they gaming. Okay, so what's the next usage? We wrote that class up, right? So let's look at that class. We can create a new class and pass it a name, and it has the operation of print. So let's create two people. And now that we have our two people, we can call the print operation from both of them. And we should see, based off the print behavior that we've defined, name, says, and then the text. So we should see that Queek will say, Queeker Tom says howdy, and Fosh will say, Fosh's says this is a print statement from Fosh's. And when we run the game, we'll see Queeker Tom says howdy, and Fosh's says this is a print statement from Fosh's. See? So we can take this class and we can define two different sets of information and perform a similar action based off what information we pass in when we create the class. And so we could even go a little further and we could say class.new from data.name, and we can say Fosh comes from data second.name. I'll change the data in here so it's a little more readable for you guys. But we should see here how we can use these two systems to combine each other. And so we can say the Queek instance of this class passes in the first name, which is QueekerTom, and the second class will use the second name, which is Fosh's. Now running, they should both say hello. Okay, so the last example I'm going to look at is the functional form. And this is where we return a function that performs some action. So functional works in the way where, as we require the module script, this variable takes the form of a function. It's the exact same as defining a function in your code, but we're requiring a module script to get this function. The purpose being that maybe we want to reuse this function multiple times in different parts of our code. So we break it off into a module script, and anywhere where we might want to use it, we can access it again. So our functional says I did and then the action. Since we're passing in these two variables from our data, we should see I did action and action. Yeah, so see I did scripter, I did teach. Those are some pretty simple examples, but let's take a look at a more complex game where we can put these strategies to work. So in my game Thrift Crazy, in my replicated storage, look at all these modules that I have, right? And we got some different ones going on. Here, item data is a representation, well, it combines two actually, is that it uses the util style to store and distribute information while also containing all of these data informations. So here's another example of a util script is this button style that I've defined. And button style basically takes in a button and a container that the button sits in, and it applies this stylization where the button gets this smooth tween and this pop sound when it's used and clicked. So if we go into the game, we can see that a lot of the buttons in the game have this tween where they get bigger, this little pop when as they get smaller as you click, and it happens to be on a lot of different elements in the game. And I've generally used it all around. And that's one example where the util is very helpful because there's different components of the game, like this toolbar down here, or this close button, or all these settings buttons, where we want to apply this soft button style. So we use this util module to apply this style to all these buttons. And another example we can look at, this is a different game of mine that I was working on called The Pit. It's a sword fighting game. We can show how the functional approach can be used for interface. Notice on the side here I have this interface module with all these submodules under it. And all of them follow a similar pattern of returning a function which passes in this root GUI, which is the core interface for my game. And each of these controls a different subpart of the interface. The one we're looking at right now tracks this gold counter on the side. And you can see that when we pass in the root GUI, this controls the behavior of making sure that the gold is updated to the value that we have set on the player. This game also uses the data mixed with util paradigm that I talked about earlier, where all of the data is represented as one of these tables with a name, cost, rarity, all this information that's packaged up and distributed by a parent module. Additionally, for our crates, there's all this information that's packed up and then distributed by a parent module. This module script here demonstrates the functional approach for repeatedly creating UI elements. I talked earlier about how if you had an inventory item or an inventory cell, that you might want to have a repeated behavior within it. So what this does is it passes in an ID, an effect, and a hover, and essentially it will return the created frame based off the given input data. So if we pass in the sort ID, it'll populate the interface with all the data, it'll apply the effects, and it'll apply a hover. And this is used in a lot of different places in my game. So loading up the game, we can see that in my inventory, we use this cell to represent all of these sorts. And we can see the pop effect as we hover over and the title appearance effect as we hover over as well. You can see that I have reused this effect for the pop and the hover. And if I open a crate, You can see that I've reused it again, where there is no pop and there's no hover, but it still has this rarity and sword icon. Okay guys, that was a lot to go over, but if you enjoyed the video, leave a thumbs up. If you have any questions about the video, comment down below. And thank you guys. Have a good day.